There we go. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Tim Beat. So I'll just kind of start off from the beginning again, since it wasn't the recording hadn't started before. So again, welcome to today's training. My name is Sarah Chang, and I'm joined here by my colleague Sonia Reed, and we're both from ACCESS Employment, delivering the second workshop in this series today. And it's all about, strategies on how to retain your employees through building a culture of inclusion, as well as looking at some cultural sensitivity training to help you better understand your diverse workforce. So before we get started, we would like to begin by starting with a land acknowledgement. So we'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather today is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe and Chippewa peoples, and the Haudenosaunee and Huron-Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, give our respect to its first inhabitants. To kick things off, I'd like to share a little bit about what we do as an organization. For those of you who joined us in the first workshop, you probably have, we've definitely gone over this, but if you're new here today, we'd love to share a little bit about what ACCESS does as an organization. So we're a not-for-profit organization that seek to help anyone looking to find a job in Canada. With a particular focus on barriered individuals, newcomers, and refugees to help them find meaningful employment. We have 7 offices in the GTA. However, our client reach goes beyond Ontario as we deliver a lot of our programs and services virtually to job seekers located all across the globe. And we currently work with over 40,000 job seekers in our database, providing them with free employment training and connecting them to our network of 2,000 plus employers across all different sectors. We work with employers for hiring, fundraising, and sponsorship opportunities, as well as connecting them to our talent pool of highly educated and diverse job seekers. Here are some of our stats from our 2020 to 2021 fiscal year. And as you can see, we're continuing to deliver strong results across all programs and services. All right, so I'm just going to go over the agenda really quickly. So the first portion of this training, is going to be about the importance of inclusion, with a particular focus on inclusive leadership style and what that means. And the second portion will go through some team management techniques, specifically looking at the importance of culture sensitivity, as well as defining microaggressions and addressing them in the workplace. A couple of housekeeping items before we move ahead here. So the presentation itself, or the training itself today, shouldn't take longer than an hour. However, we're giving folks an extra 30 minutes in case you have any questions. We'd like for this training to be as interactive as possible. So we'd like to give everyone some extra time for discussion and some questions. We'll be checking to see if there are any questions throughout the presentation. So if you do have a question or a comment, feel free to use the chat. Or like, as I mentioned, we'd love to see a lot of participation from the audience today. So simply unmute your mics and we'd be happy to, address your questions or comments. And if you have a question that you'd like to ask anonymously, please go ahead and DM myself or Sonia. Please remember, we're creating a very safe space today for active discussion and participation on these particular topics. But if you like to, direct your question anonymously, that's okay as well. And like I mentioned, go ahead and DM myself or Sonia, and we will, pay attention to the chat. And as mentioned before, we want to make this session as interactive as possible. Please, please, please don't be afraid to ask us questions. We'd love to share and hear relevant stories as well, or anything that you'd like to comment on that is relevant to the training today. All right. Any questions about the agenda? Anything before I move on? Okay, great. All right. So we're going to start off by looking at a letter that was written by the CEO of a well-known company in the retail industry. So this was a statement that was put out by the CEO of Urban Outfitters in response to the recent police violence on the Black community. So I'll give everyone a minute or two to read this letter. I know it's kind of small, so feel free to let me know if you can't see it. Okay. So I hope everyone has had a chance to read through this statement. And as you can see, the CEO of Urban Outfitters has made a very public statement on some of the goals that they'd like to accomplish to address the recent Black violence, the recent police violence on the Black community. And like Urban Outfitters, many organizations have expressed support for racialized and marginalized communities, especially Black employees, due to their current climate. And they have put out statements similar to this one, even supporting Black businesses or communities with donations. So personally, I believe this is great, that companies are vocalizing support, but at the same time, the effectiveness of a company's support must be coupled with authenticity that can be expressed by their own employees. All right. So again, I'm going to restate that so you can kind of mull it over and keep that in mind in the back of your brain as we're going through this training today, because it's very important. It's not just about a company making a public statement to support marginalized communities, but that support must be coupled with authenticity that can be expressed by the employees. Okay, and we're going to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that as we go through. So there was an article written by Catherine Dunn in the Philadelphia Inquirer back in July of 2020, after the statement was made by executives in the organization. So the article details accounts of discrimination and racism that employees experienced while working there. And, as mentioned before, many companies think putting out a statement is enough, but oftentimes that's because they're scared to open up that discussion because they fear change or backlash from the public. But there are numerous other organizations that actually want to have that conversation and hear the voices of their employees. They care and they want to bring about change. So it's really important for organizations to, own up to their mistakes, own up to their past instances of, racism and microaggressions in the workplace, and make a conscious effort to care and bring about change. So usually in response to, whatever civil action or whatever is going on in the media, companies like to respond by starting off with a couple of DEI initiatives, such as starting up an EDI council, improving their branding or changing their logo and branding in response to that. Put together celebratory events to kind of recognize some of their diverse staff, put together potlucks or parties such as that, as well as celebrating holidays or diverse holidays. So while these solid steps are in the right direction, without fostering an inclusive leadership mindset, as well as an inclusive environment, authentic employee involvement, executive buy-in, and making that change from within first, we won't be able to see an actual difference. Okay, so I want you to think about that. Again, I'm not saying that it's bad for companies to start up these DEI initiatives in response to, for example, the violence against Black communities. I think it's a great start. However, companies really need to look at what's going on within, making sure that there's executive buy-in, making sure that there's an environment of inclusivity, as well as authentic employee involvement in order to make an actual difference. All right. So I'm going to hand things off to Sonia to take us through the next couple of slides.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you, TV, for the introduction as well. So just before we go into this slide, I really want to open it up to the floor, to everyone who is here today. And I love that little intermission where we had somebody who joined and they were singing, and I'm like, ooh, this is a great way to get our day going. But this is also going to be another great opportunity for you to unmute your microphone, because before we start diving deeper into inclusion, I want you to look at the subject. Why should we care about inclusion? And I want you to unmute your microphone and share your own thoughts as to why you think it's important for us to all care about inclusion. And I'm hoping to have at least 2 participations. So in no particular order, unmute your microphone and let me know your thoughts as to why we should care about inclusion.
I think we live in a very multicultural country, which means that, everyone's very different, comes from different backgrounds. And that means they have a lot of value to bring, a lot of fresh ideas, a lot of different ways of thinking. So being inclusive isn't just great for the candidates, but it's also great for the company.
That's such a great point. Thank you so much, Kelly. Does anybody else want to share? Why should we care about inclusion?
You go ahead, Tim.
You go ahead.
Okay, thank you. For me, as employee that never speak English, I just landed in Canada for less than a month, and I got the job at Sephora. It's just the big mind blowing that I thought I will be the part of the culture of the whole thing change of my life, that I left behind and I study everything new. And then when it come to English, my English is so bad. I start with the company with 0 English, but the company give me so much opportunity, and then they believe in me. And then now I'm prove myself from seasonal operation to manager to state and services manager, I think we miss out a lot of opportunity for so many people that they different. We have to accept everyone. It's so sad that we have to talk about this, but the truth is we don't know who we're running into. Because they're different doesn't mean they not belong to us. The different is something that we need to learn about, and then we need to learn about everyone. We different skin tone, but doesn't mean we can. Even their skin tone that is so cool that they have different skin tone. How they take care of each other. We have a lot of opportunity to learn about each other and to learn about the culture. As like the person that mentioned before, that we don't know that we are different, and in the country that we live in, we multi-culture, right? And it's so cool that we get to learn about each other, and I just love the company to have the opportunity for us, and I think we supposed to spread it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And over to you, Tina.
I was just typing away here, so I'll just read what I was typing here. So I was just going to share that I think that it's important to have people feel like they belong, you know, and when someone feels like they belong, they can be authentic. And then through that, you're going to have more engaged employees where, you know, they're learning from each other, they're happy at work. And obviously there's positive results that come from that in the environment, you know, like the health environment of the workplace, but also positive results when it comes to business too.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So, you know, I'll share a good example as well before I go into the presentation. So yesterday was Dream a Day Fest at the NFR Center. In our organization, ACCESS Employment had a booth. And there were a couple of us ladies manning the booth, and I noticed the girls who were coming up, the high school students that were coming up, they come up to the booth and it's almost like they do an environmental scan. And the ones who identify with the persons, meaning the staff that were at the booth, they automatically ran up to those people. So I had little black girls running up to me, and I remember this one little girl, she said to me, she had a brochure and she did this. She said, "Are you from the Caribbean?" And I thought, okay, yes, I am. How did you know that? And we had a good chat. And I scanned the room and I said to one of my colleagues, you know, this is such a great example of inclusion, because representation expands itself to inclusion. When people see somebody that they can identify with, they automatically feel comfortable. Right? They feel belong. Belonging is such an important part of that EDI mainframe. So let's just look at some of the statistics here today. So regardless of the situation, it is in most instances when people come to work, they want to do their best. They want to succeed. And a key component of being successful is creating an inclusive environment where employees feel as though they belong, not despite of, but because of their unique strengths. So earlier on, somebody mentioned starting out in not having, you know, a good command of the English language and the opportunity that the company provided her with, and now she's in a management role. That's a great example of inclusion. Yes, you came from a different country. Yes, you speak a different language. Yes, we all look very different. But if there is an opportunity that makes you feel as though you belong, it also increases the chances of the company having you there longer than a situation where you don't feel belong. Because when you feel as though you're part of something greater, then you're motivated. You have great intentions for work. You want to succeed. You want to be successful in whatever you're doing. So perception and inclusion can have profound impacts on how turnover intentions. A report on Canadian employees found that when employees perceive a high culture of inclusion, they're less likely to report strong turnover intentions. And it's very true. It's very evident. Think about ourselves. If we're working for an organization, they always say people don't leave companies, they leave their leaders, right? They leave the people they report to. So Sarah and I work on the same team. And one of the things that it's so common among everybody on our team, we always say, oh my God, we love our boss so much. She's amazing. And part of that is because we feel included. We are included in decision making. We're included on ideas. We're included on feelings. Our thoughts are always taken into consideration. Assignments, everything about our team makes us feel belong to a greater body. And that's why we love what we do. We love our organization. And when you walk into a company, you can tell persons who feel belonged. They feel as though they're part of something. They're happy. They're so motivated. We have a speed mentoring session happening today, and you can tell the people who walk in and they mean business. They're so happy. How are you today? Great to see you. And they want to chat and they want to have conversations. And I always, I call these people the positive fairy, because sometimes when I walk in and I'm all in my element and people are like, oh my God, Sonia, what's going on today? It shows automatically you too want to have it. You want to have a conversation. You also want to be a part of something. And that speaks to inclusion. So let's look a little bit more at the stats. So 72% of employees who perceive a high sense of belonging in their organization reported intending to stay with their organization, compared to 22% of employees who perceive a low sense of belonging. If you don't feel as though you belong, you're not going to hang around. You're not going to walk into work feeling motivated. You're going to be less enthused to be your best at what you do. And chances are you're going to be at work looking for work because you don't feel as though you need to be here, right? And this speaks to the importance of inclusion. So as you can see, creating a culture of inclusion leads to greater retention, and greater retention leads to improving your employer brand and increasing your bottom line. It's the same thing goes for recruitment. A study that was done, and I don't remember which institute did it, but they were speaking about potential employees, what made them decide to work for an organization, right? You go to the website, you look at the senior leadership team, you look at, what groups or what they're doing with the community, and that helps you to decide whether or not you want to be there. And when you get into the organization, it continues, right? You came in and now you realize, oh my God, this is such an amazing place to work. I want to stay here. I want to grow here. I want to develop, especially organization that offers development. That's also making you feel as though you are included. You are being included. Your growth is important. Your development is important. And they support you to ensure that you are also successful in whatever you're doing. So I'm going to, put another question out there, and I want to hear from you again. What are some of the challenges that you face in trying to onboard and retain diverse talent? And I'm hoping to have I'm hoping to hear from two persons at least from our audience. What are some of the challenges you have faced in trying to onboard and retain diverse talent?
In previous organizations that I've been in, I think one of the biggest challenges has been leadership being, and I just don't know how else to say this, but white. More male-dominated, white-dominated leadership. And I feel like they fail to see outside of that box. So whenever, as a recruiter myself, whenever I'm presenting diverse candidates, sometimes they'll go to cultural fit. They're not a cultural fit. But what does that really mean? That they don't have the same experiences that you do? That's not necessarily a negative thing, right? So I think as we start to change and diversify our leadership, it makes it easier for us to diversify our entire workforce.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Culture add and never fit. Okay. Thanks for sharing that, Salma.
Yeah, I think like one challenge that I faced at all organizations, because I think it's something kind of fundamental to any person as a person, right, is sort of around competitiveness as it relates to benefits, wages, and a lot of that to a degree kind of plays into equity as well, right? So it's like, maybe you don't have an MBA, attached to your education, but that's not to say that you haven't done just as much or more than, another employee. Does that mean that your pay should differ dramatically from one person to the next? Equally so, like if we're thinking about, the way that we show up at work, knowing how different everyone is and how different people's needs are we flexible, right? Are we accommodating sort of beyond, the legal accommodation, regarding people with disabilities? Are we accommodating for people that just have a different lifestyle, right? Maybe someone who has children, right? Or someone who, has aging parents that they're taking care of. Like there's just so many situations where people could need accommodation. So it's just like the general flexibility of things, right? Are you competitive with other employers? Are they doing more and better to give people, that elevated experience in a workplace?
Thank you so much for sharing that, Salma. It's so good. I mean, I think our and Sarah, you can back me up on this, but the first presentation that we did in the series of training looked at equity hiring. And that was one of the things that we spoke on is, okay, how are we exactly gonna encourage persons to be a part of our organization and join them? And looking at the languages that we have in our job description. Yes, we want somebody who has a PhD. Okay, that's going to eliminate maybe 30% of the population of persons that would potentially apply to this role. And there's, for recruiters who are here, there's a big war on talent, right? There's a huge war on talent. Recruiters are really struggling to find persons to be a part of their organization. And so that was such a great comment that you made in terms of how do we quantify? Okay, so you're looking for somebody who has a PhD, but maybe this person also has 15 or 20 years of experience, leading teams, designing, implementing, monitoring, measuring. Now, where's the comparison and how does that fit into the language in your job description? Because if you have it just as this is what we need, we're looking for somebody who has a PhD and nothing else, no other option, then how is the application going to look? A lot of people are not going to be encouraged to apply. And we also looked at the language in terms of, making it more general as opposed to saying, looking for a rock star or looking for somebody to support the chairman, maybe just saying somebody to support the chair. So thank you so much for bringing that up. We're going to look at exclusive leadership and what that looks like within organizations. So traditional leadership, the traditional leadership models focus on categorizing high to low performers. And typically leaders may tend to create in-groups that only focus on high performers rather than addressing individual needs and performance. Sorry, let me just click that off. This can lead to leaders thinking that it's my team members' fault for weak performance, but never looking at themselves and how they can make space and offer support for employees to thrive. Traditional leadership usually have some of the following qualities, designed to focus on harmonious teams, not a lot on diverse team or diverse thought. That is managing a sales team that is composed of only 20-something men. So we know the team is, it's such a big word in the sense that, you reflect your team reflects you as well. And being an inclusive leader, one of the great attributes to have is taking ownership, is being accountable. If your team fails, it's not necessarily because they don't know what they're doing, but it also reflects on you. How often are you checking in with your team? Do you know your team's strengths and weaknesses? How do you delegate? Are you delegating tasks to persons who don't have the skill sets to get those tasks done successfully, right? So when we look at traditional leadership and how persons or how those leaders categorize what they measure as success, it's literally one of the reasons why people continue to move on. It's one of the reasons why some organization has such a high level of turnover, because persons often start to feel as though they don't belong. They're not included. So, you have a sales team, and your sales team's forecast was, or target was, to have, I'm just going to randomly say $150,000 in sales for the month of September. They came in at 50. Now, an inclusive leader would sit with the team and say, okay, walk me through what happened this month. What were some of the changes? Or maybe start off by saying, how is everybody doing? Such an important question, right? How is everybody doing? Check in with the feelings, check in with the mental emotional intelligence. How is everybody doing? Did something happen to somebody or somebody's during this month, during the month of September? So many things have been going on. And I think, it's great being able to do things virtual. But I think one of the disadvantages is that, you don't get a hug from somebody who sits next to you because you came in and you look a little bit different, and they say, how are you doing today? Is everything okay? And maybe you lost your cat. Maybe you lost somebody in your family. And by saying that, by vocalizing that, that person might in turn, just rub your shoulder and say to you, it's going to be okay. Or maybe even lean in to give you a hug, or say, you know what, can I get you coffee? When you're doing it virtual, chances are you just by yourself in your office, right? So that human interaction is missing. So think about back to the sales team. Sales team target was 150K. They brought in 50. An inclusive leader would try to sit down and figure out what's going on with the team. What were the tasks allocated, and who were those individuals that were supposed to do something, and why wasn't it done? And what's the reasoning behind it? How were they doing? Because all results are a part of a bigger picture. It takes into consideration the persons who are doing it, right? And sometimes we're not always at our best. And if we're not always at our best, chances are there's something going on as to why we're not always at our best. So as opposed to just saying, you know what, it's all my team's fault. I don't know what happened with them, what was going on, why they did not meet their target. The best place to start is really to sit with your team and start having those discussions to find out what went wrong and how you can support them to ensure that when October comes around or November comes around, they're in a better position than they were in September. Now, another area to think about is, sorry, Sarah, it's okay. So let's look at cultural dimension. And if anybody wants to add anything before I continue, please chime in. I love when I hear from persons in the audience. So we're going to look at cultural dimension, and we're going to look at group-oriented as well as individualistic. So the first place to start is looking at cultural dimensions within your team. Everyone's life goals, values, sense of social belonging, and motivators are different. So if I can think back on my team, everybody on my team has a different personality, right? Some people are extroverts, some people are introverts, some people have a mix of both. Some people are extremely extroverted in certain groups, and in other groups, they're very introverted. And because maybe that's just not their comfort zone, right? That's another thing about being an introvert and extrovert. Somebody will say, oh, Sonia, you're a little bit quiet at this event. Normally you're chatty. Well, maybe it's just not my group strength. Maybe this is not a group that I feel very confident with having the conversations that's been had. Maybe it's just, I'm not very aware of the topic, so I rather be quiet so I can listen and maybe take away information and go do my own research so I can participate a little bit different or a little bit better. Introverts tend to be great listeners. There you go. But sometimes people think, you know what, no, you're a little bit too introverted. I don't think you'll be great on this team. But maybe that's the exact person that you need, because they're going to capture all the information that's been shared. And those are normally the people who are able to analyze, like they are great at analyzing things and presenting information. So you want to have a mixture of the different type of people that you have in your group, right? Now, for example, you may have a person on your team who you characterize to be more individualistic, someone who doesn't need to be micromanaged and values autonomy in their work. But because of that, may come off as a show-off. Have you ever seen examples of like that in your team? Somebody say, yeah, you know what, I don't have to worry about Sonia, she'll figure it out. And so Sonia is now, you know, very pumped up with pride because she knows she doesn't get the same management style as everybody else on her team. And now you start thinking about all the other people on Sonia's team and they start feeling, well, why is it that Sonia gets to make these decisions? Why does she always get called upon to do something? What happens to me? Why am I not being included? So another thing is that people struggle with working within their team because a lot of times they're put into groups that they don't really belong in. It's not a group that really fits their management style. It's not a group that fits their leadership style, or it's just not a group that they're being developed to be a part of, right? So somebody shared a good example with me. I think it was on Monday. I was at an event and or I was in a meeting and somebody says to me that, you know, I really struggle with public speaking. And I said, I would never think that. And she said, really? And I said, no, I think you're a great speaker. And she said to me, no, but I really struggle every time that I'm about to present. Like I go through these really high anxiety emotions. I come across as though I am doing well, but it's not a great feeling. And so I said to her, you know what have you been doing to help you with that? And she said, well, you know, I kind of just, I don't know, I just tell myself I need to do it. And so I do it. And I said to her, well, have you considered having a mentor? Have you considered, you know, being a part of groups that support presentation or public speaking? And she said, not really, but maybe that's a good idea, right? Because sometimes we see people doing great and we automatically think, oh my God, they're so great. They're so good at what they do. But that's what we're seeing is sort of a facade because we don't know what's going on behind the scene. And so it takes us back to us being very careful about, you know, how we categorize people. Is it really a fit in? Is Sonia really a good fit for this team? Or is Sarah really a bad fit for that team? Thank you, Sarah. And guys, please participate in the chat. I love it. So it's important to know all of this as an inclusive leader so you can offer support and resources for each member of your team when they are excelling in one area of their job, but not in the other. So again, think about it. Every time that you're working with a team or you're leading a team, or even if you're part of the team, I remember way before I even got into supervisory management roles, going back to say college or university, doing a group project, I would always look at the people that I'm doing the project with and go, okay, so who's comfortable doing this? And who's comfortable doing that? And who wants to do this part? And who would maybe just want to be the one behind the scene collecting all the data, because we all have different strengths. And understanding our strengths and understanding our group strength is how groups, teams, and organizations succeed. Next slide, Sarah.
Thanks, Sonia.
All right. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, no, I can just take over from here if you don't mind. Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Sonia, for going through, you know, kind of introducing us to the idea of inclusive leadership and what inclusive leaders should start focusing on. So let's go back again to why inclusive leadership is important. As we grow over the next few years, we know, and Sonia had kind of touched upon this very well before, that we know the war on talent will continue as we now enter into a virtual global market. Seeing that we will look for talent in Toronto, which is one of the most multi-ethnic cities in the world, we must be able to authentically show talent that we value diversity and inclusion. It's about creating a space that employees can thrive and be excellent, and that they can bring their whole self without fear of repercussion. Inclusive leadership is about incorporating diverse teams that are high performing and recognizing that they can only perform when they're managed inclusively. And it's a part of your competitive advantage. So leaders need to start looking at the fact that in order to help diverse teams be successful, you need to incorporate inclusivity within the whole equation. And once you have number 1 and 2, both diversity and inclusion, it becomes a part of your competitive advantage. And you'll start seeing that you're going to retain better talent, talent that works really well together, as well as talent that comes with a diverse group of people, as well as diverse group of thought. So a conscious effort needs to be made to ensure there is alignment between recruitment practices, leadership training, as well as retention efforts, including ensuring that employees feel supported and valued. So here are a couple of areas of focus for retention that kind of incorporates what we've talked about already. So inclusive leaders should build and collaborate with employee resource groups and have open conversations about purpose, goals, and strategies surrounding your diversity and inclusion initiatives. If your company doesn't have an employee or doesn't have ERGs, I suggest that that is the first step for you to incorporate some diversity and inclusion strategies within your organization. ERGs, they should create opportunities for individuals within the company with a shared identity to connect, voice their ideas, work together on EDI initiatives, etc., and work together on EDI initiatives. So as an example, ACCESS Employment, right now we have 2 ERG groups, one for our LGBTQ community, as well as one for our Black community. Other ways to collaborate with ERGs are, celebrating various cultural holidays, company-wide, and respecting religious differences, even going as far as allowing for some time off for these to recognize these religious holidays as required, including these groups to ensure that inclusion with all staff on company-wide celebrations and including them on the planning process as well. Collaborating with ERGs to create educational content for employees to learn about their communities. So as an example of our LGBTQ ERG group, we have they've actually incorporated an educational pillar for all of our ACCESS staff. And that educational pillar is, a space where staff can share movies that they've watched that kind of relates to what the ERG stands for, movies, or any resources that they like to share with each other, just to increase that awareness amongst the entire organization. You can also open lines of communication between leadership and other levels of the organization through collaboration with employee resource groups. And, ERGs can also help encourage new employees to get involved in these type of committees and volunteer opportunities. So the second point, anti-racism and leadership training, I don't have to go into too much detail about that. It's very straightforward. It's very important to incorporate some sort of anti-racism and leadership training within your, I guess, your training model for both staff and senior managers. Training should focus on how leaders can plan and support employee initiatives, cultural sensitivity training. It should encourage leaders to foster an environment where everyone is heard and where it's safe for team members to propose new ideas, as well as give team members decision-making authority. So incorporating these two really fosters that inclusive leadership mindset, as well as inclusivity across the board. Third point is, what really helps retain your talent and staff is a company should really focus on identifying clear career pathways and growth opportunities. These can help retain employees. And some ways you can do this would be, for example, identifying mid to high performing candidates made up of diverse employees for potential future leadership roles. You can also create cross-functional leadership opportunities to showcase project work. For example, assign some stretch assignments for future leaders throughout the company. And we also have found that setting up a mentorship and sponsorship program within your company can really help, get the career pathways and growth opportunities on track for the rest of your staff. And some more ideas surrounding growth development. You can identify individuals within the company to champion and support open conversations. You can strategize on opportunities for career mapping with all employees as part of their retention process, and suggest solutions for those who struggle to create enough opportunities for career growth within the company. So this is really about, looking at strengths and weaknesses and kind of using the weakness and using that as an opportunity to recognize different strategies on how to help that person grow. You can also create a forum where people can share their ideas and experiences and confront uncomfortable topics without judgment. So as an example, at ACCES, we have our monthly EDI chats where we focus on a particular topic, and it's really an open forum where staff can come in, share their ideas and thoughts, share their lived experiences of that particular topic, and really create that safe space where uncomfortable conversations can happen. And obviously, invest in training programs for everyone. It's really important to help your staff continue their learning progression and help them learn and really continues to develop talent that way. So these strategies are really designed to help all employees, not just your high-performing ones, to go beyond understanding unconscious bias and help them create these conscious efforts and activities that will facilitate EDI activities and shift your workplace culture to help marginalized individuals succeed. And ultimately from that, creating an inclusive environment and develop a culture of inclusive leadership. All right. Any questions so far before we move on? Okay, no problem. All right, so again, I know we've already touched upon this, but I think it's really important to go over the why. Why is inclusive leadership important? And studies have shown that diverse teams managed inclusively perform better than homogeneous teams. as well as diverse teams that are not managed inclusively. So this is an important note. It's not enough to just have a diverse team. Everyone on the team needs to have access to tools and support to help them be successful in order to make the whole thing work. All right, so diversity and inclusion, they need to go together in order to bring success to the company. So how can we manage our teams inclusively? These are just some strategies that you can start incorporating within your teams as well as within your leaders. So deconstructing systemic bias is a great place to start. Looking at how individual biases affect your internal system. So for example, in your recruitment process, rather than considering all candidates, a hiring manager may be quick to favor certain people because they're cut from a similar cloth. So this goes back to, I believe it was Kelly who made the point about how sometimes you have trouble getting some buy-in from your senior leaders because, they're all kind of cut from a similar cloth. They're all white male, cis male, and maybe they all went to university in Canada, and they're looking for someone, or they're looking to hire someone who's cut from that same cloth. So this works similarly in team dynamics as well. If you think about your team, as a manager, you may favor some team members over others. Because maybe I like Sonia because we're both women of color, and I may not identify or relate to another team member who is a cis white male on my team. So we need to recognize these internal biases and really use that to remove barriers of favoritism in our teams in order to support team members that may feel isolated, that may feel isolated. So really important to look at your internal biases, deconstructing them, and then kind of addressing them, not just with yourself, but with the rest of your team as well. So using inclusive language in teams is another great way to manage your team inclusively. Language is really important. So, really, we need to consider the relevance of the words that we use. So for example, not appropriate in today's day to use the words such as powwow to reflect on a group meeting. Using language such as, young people always want X and Y. It may be true in some cases, but the important thing to kind of remember here is to not overgeneralize, because when you overgeneralize, you may cause someone to feel isolated and not speak up. So it's not about walking on eggshells regarding on what we say, but it's about respecting each other's differences as we create greater inclusion. The 2 and 2 technique is helpful in group discussion. So how this works is you can ask the group, what are 2 reasons you agree with this idea and 2 reasons you don't agree on this idea? And some people may have nothing to disagree on, but there may be one person in the room who does have an alternate view, and this would give them an opportunity to share their perspective if it doesn't align with yours. So this really helps build your listening skills and drives empathy amongst your team, which is a key value to fostering a culture of inclusion. Number 4, team accountability. So again, very straightforward. We need to keep ourselves accountable and confident. We should be comfortable with sharing feedback with each other in order to help us grow. And the last 2, cultural sensitivity and understanding and managing microaggressions, we're going to be kind of looking at a little bit deeply in the next couple of slides. Any questions, comments?
Just a quick comment here. It was something we discussed as a digital team the other day, but talking about the inclusive language, something I hadn't thought about, and it was just great that it was brought up, the idea that when we're presenting or creating content or putting communications out to the world, that we're mindful of like certain, what's the, I can't remember the word for it, but like saying, you know, like saying food for thought, or I can't think of anything else. Two birds, one stone. Not everyone's gonna understand or know what those things actually mean. So being careful of language like that too, in the words that we're using too.
Yeah, for sure. And this kind of ties back in with our first training. You know, we talked a lot about using inclusive language. You know, we kind of focused a little bit on, you know, gender coded language as well, but really also going through these layman terms that may be culturally aligned with what an individual may be comfortable with if they were born and raised in North America. But for someone who is an immigrant, refugee, someone who basically, you know, wasn't born in North America or Canada, they may not understand what that means. So, you know, as an inclusive leader, it's really, really important to start kind of just putting yourself in other people's shoes. Use empathy to drive the kind of language that you use in order to help everyone feel included within the team. So that's a really great point. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, and just speaking to the inclusive language piece, Kelly literally just added it to the text, but right now we use a system called Textio, which is an awesome tool that helps you not just understand the language that's being used, but what its impact is. So when someone's reading a particular word, right, does it skew in a gendered way? Does it like discourage someone from, let's say, applying to a job? And so we're starting to use that in a variety of settings, including job postings, a lot of our external facing content and stuff, and, you know, hoping that we can continue to expand that throughout the business. Additionally, lots of teams have my informal inclusive language guide that we're hoping to turn into something more formalized for Sephora, so we can then share that out with anyone who's interested in leveraging that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, ACCESS would be very interested in kind of looking at what you've put together for that guide. So, you know, let's connect offline, Salma, and maybe we can share some resources. That would be amazing. Great. A couple people coming through the chat. Thank you, Salma. Okay, great. Yeah, and going back to Kelly's point as well, Textio, there is a lot of similar gender decoder tools that you can use. It really just, you know, is for you to go on Google and search gender decoder, and a lot of times you can copy and paste your job description into that decoder, and it'll point out a list of, you know, masculine driven and feminine driven words to kind of help you gauge whether your job posting is, you know, catered to more of like a masculine profile or a feminine profile. And obviously the goal here is to keep it gender neutral. So, you know, using these tools are a great way to help you determine that. Awesome. Thank you everyone for all your wonderful comments and feedback. I really, really love that. All right, so let's dive a little bit more into cultural sensitivity. And I'm going to leave this slide here for, you know, maybe 30 seconds to let everyone read the definition of cultural sensitivity. I will also read it out loud as well. So what is cultural sensitivity? Cultural sensitivity is knowing that differences exist between cultures, but not assigning values to the differences. For example, better or worse, right or wrong. It is on the foundation of cultural sensitivity that we build the cultural knowledge, skills, and behaviors that characterize cultural competence. And the main takeaway here from this definition is really not assigning values to the differences, right? I remember that this really hit home for me because, you know, I grew up in a household where we're pretty much raised with Catholic values. And, you know, when I first met people who are of Islamic faith, you know, I always kind of assigned the wrong kind of signature onto that religion, just because for myself, it's just from the surface, you know, I always thought, oh, they don't value women's rights and all that. But cultural sensitivity and being culturally sensitive is not about that. It's not just about being aware of different cultures and that differences exist, but really focusing on the fact that there is no right or wrong. They're just different values from yours. And once you kind of unlearn what you were brought up with and focus on this definition, excuse me, it will help you build the foundation of being culturally sensitive. All right, so I want everyone to kind of mull over that and really, really consider and embed that within your new philosophy. So what cultural sensitivity could look like? The best approach to cultural sensitivity is, like I mentioned before, empathy. It's a two-way street. Both sides need to make an effort to adapt, as it leads to more moderate levels of challenge for everyone. So you can inspire someone by modeling and explaining Canadian workplace values. You can ask someone their preferred pronouns and actively use them. Using layman's terms and avoiding or explaining jargon. So going back to, you know, what we were talking about, using terms like killing two birds with one stone or food for thought. Maybe someone who didn't grow up here wouldn't know what that means. So being conscious of that and avoiding jargon. Avoid overgeneralizing about a country or a culture. So what I was mentioning before, you know, initially when I thought about Islam and the Muslim faith, I always thought, oh, you know, they just don't like women. But obviously that's not true, right? There's so much more to that religion and to every religion. So it's really important to not overgeneralize and really make that effort to learn about another's country or culture. And if you don't know, don't be afraid to ask. You know, a lot of success that comes from diverse teams is all about that open and honest conversation. So as we talked about before, it's not about walking on eggshells and being afraid to kind of say the wrong things. To build a diverse and inclusive culture, there's always going to be hiccups. Everyone's going to stumble along the way, but it's a learning process. The important thing is everyone is learning together to become a more diverse and inclusive culture. Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Yeah, we do make a lot of assumptions about people based on biases. So it's very important to ask instead of assume. Yeah, I love that. Very, very important. So here are some ways to adapt. Be understanding of what they're going through. You know, again, going back to the whole empathy point, you put yourself in their shoes. Watch for signs of underlying culture shock, especially for, you know, and I'm sure this is very relevant to maybe what you're going through within your company as well. The crisis in Afghanistan as well as in Ukraine have brought a lot of refugees and newcomers into our country. So when you're hiring and onboarding people who are kind of going through this sort of crisis, really be mindful of the culture shock and be mindful that newcomers carry a high burden of stress. Like, they aren't just adapting to your workplace culture, but they're adapting to a new culture just in general. Coming to Canada, how to set up your bank account, how to set up their phone lines, how to set up an RESP for their child, how to buy a house, how to rent a house. All these things are working in the back of their minds, in addition to adjusting to a new workplace culture. So, watch for those signs of underlying culture shock. For example, moodiness, they're complaining, they lack a sense of humor, they may act aggressive, they may be ill, taking a lot of personal time off. You may notice that they're, fatigued because they're having sleep issues, or they're generally just not participating in team meetings and being isolating or isolating themselves. So watch for those signs. And if they are showing these signs, important to help that person find supports in their community. You can, reduce their stress by adapting training and work methods, and obviously, accommodate their religious practices as much as you can. Maybe giving them a day off, or allowing a flex work schedule, anything that you can think of to kind of help them just feel more welcomed in the new community. Okay, thank you, Salma. For anyone who hasn't done our UB training on MSL yet, I highly recommend it. Salma, if you can unmute yourself really quickly to kind of just go through that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So as a part of our organization's like D&I heart strategy, it's sort of like our internal loving term for that strategy. Education and cultural competence is absolutely one element of that strategy. And as a part of that, we've created a 3-year curriculum on a variety of DEIB related topics, where unconscious bias is one of the ones that has already been developed and rolled out. So it was just a reminder, considering who's on the line, it being primarily like Sephora folks. If you haven't already had a chance to go into our learning platform, My Sephora Learning, or MSL, just note that we have a beautiful DEIB dashboard there with a variety of resources on it, including that unconscious bias e-learning module.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. And I've actually jotted that down myself as well. I'm definitely going to check that out sometime later this week, just because, yeah, and within this community, the DEI community, it's very, very important for us to share resources with each other so we can help each other learn. So thank you so much, Salma, for sharing your resource, and hopefully everyone gets to check it out after the training today. All right. Okay, so other ways to adapt is, kind of take into consideration your communication and language. If it's someone whose first language isn't English, speak slowly and distinctly without slang. And going back again to these jargons, avoid or explain phrasal verbs such as catch on, point out, pitch in. You can ask a person to explain instructions back to you to ensure comprehension. And excuse me, encourage the person to take notes or give instructions in written form or graphics, you know, to kind of ensure comprehension on their end as well. And it's very important to provide constructive feedback in a private, direct, clear, and respectful way. And back to you, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thanks for all the great tips that's been shared in the chat. I am loving it. Thanks for sharing those resources with us. So we're getting close. We're getting closer to the end of our training, and we want to take this time to look at microaggressions. So recognizing microaggression and what is it? So it's a statement, it could be an action or incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or intentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as racial or ethnic minority groups. For example, and you probably hear this some point in time in your career or in your life, you're not like the other Black people I know. Because you are X, you probably are or are not like, don't like Y. So most often, microaggressions are aimed at traditionally marginalized identity groups. Yet these hurtful actions can happen to anyone of any background and at any professional level. So one criticism of this course about microaggression is that in our society, you know, people are often considered as being too hypersensitive, and that casual remarks are now blown out of proportion. However, research has shown that the negative impact of seemingly harmless statements can have on one's physical and mental health, especially over the course of an entire career, increases rate of depression, prolonged stress and trauma, physical concerns like headache, as well as high blood pressure, and difficulties with sleeping. So to combat microaggression, it is important to have candid and authentic conversations on tough subjects like sexism, homophobia, and racism. The more staff understands, the less likely we will gradually experience this in our workplace. So examples of microaggressions, when it comes to race and ethnicity, I didn't realize you were Jewish. This is a common one, right? You don't look Jewish, signaling that a person of Jewish heritage has a stereotypical look. Of course, similar statements happen to people from many different backgrounds. I believe the most qualified person should get the job, signaling that someone is being given an unfair advantage because of their race. So let's look at citizenship. Your English is so good. Where are your parents from? Signaling that people with English as a second language are generally less capable of speaking English. But where are you really from? Has anybody ever had that happen? So they'll say, you know, your English is really good. And you said, well, I was born in Jamaica. Or I was born in Canada. No, where are you really from? It's that sense of disbelief. How is this even possible? How can you speak such good English, right? Signaling that where someone grew up isn't their true origin. This microaggression often happens to people who are in ethnic and racial minorities, whom others assume are immigrants. I asked it back. I love that. I love the chat. So let's look at class. How did you get into that school? I've actually had this asked to me before, signaling that someone's background makes them an anomaly at a prestigious school. It's impossible. How did you get in? Who do you know? How do you get in? You don't seem like you grew up poor, signaling that someone from a particular socioeconomic background should look or behave a certain way. So let's talk about mental health. And this is, an area that most of us, if not all, might have used a few terminologies. Let's see how they impact the persons that we're using it to. So that's insane, or that's crazy. Using terminology related to mental health condition to describe surprise or astonishment, it's something that we often do. Oh my God, that's so crazy. It's a form of microaggression. You don't seem like you're depressed. Oh, wow. How are you depressed? Oh, I saw you out last weekend. You don't look depressed. Sometimes I get sad too. What is happening here? It's pretty much minimizing the experience of people with mental illness. But you seem to have everything you need. How are you depressed? Love that, Kelly. Thanks for adding that. Don't mind my OCD. Are we familiar with this one? Using the acronym for obsessive compulsive disorder, a mental health condition where an individual is plagued by obsessive thoughts and fears that can lead to compulsion to describe attention to details or being organized. And let's look at gender. Don't be so sensitive. Which gender is this always or more so often said to than others? Don't be so sensitive, or you're so sensitive. Women for sure. We've all, or some of us, or most of us have heard that term, right? So signaling that someone, likely a woman, is being too emotional in a situation where a man would be more objective. I have this a lot. Where are you from? Thailand. Oh, do you? Thanks for sharing that. All right, so let's look at thanks, sweetheart. And similar comments often directed at women, which are often not appreciated or even offensive. Now, looking at sexuality, that's so gay. To mean something is bad or undesirable, signaling that being gay is associated with negative and undesirable characteristics. Do you have a wife or husband? Which assume, here we go again, making assumptions, right? Assuming somebody is not from Canada or somebody is not from the country that they say they are, using terminologies that are often associated with mental health. But now let's look at parental status. And we've also heard this one before. You don't have kids to pick up, so you can work later, right? Signaling that someone without children does not have a life outside work. Is there any other microaggressions that someone want to share? I see the chat is going. Sarah, if I miss anything, you can bring it to the attention, but great information coming in the chat.
Yeah, we've had a couple of folks kind of just say, let me see, let me scroll back here. Kelly said, but you have everything you need. How are you depressed?
That's such a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've heard that one before myself. Pina wrote, where are you from? Oh, Thailand? Do you do massage? No, I work at Sephora. Yeah.
You're too young to be a leader. You're not even 40. That's another popular one. Oh, how I don't like that one at all. Thanks for putting that one in the chat. All right, so how do we respond to microaggression? Encouraging employees to speak up and having difficult conversations with their colleagues if necessary. Recognizing the right moment to say something. Timing is everything. Create a safe space for these conversations, very important. Consider relationship, bring in other colleagues if necessary. right? You wanna bring in persons within your organization are able to relate to. Frame conversation to be about intent versus impact. I know you didn't mean it like this, but your comment made me feel a certain way, right? So consider the environment and be thoughtful about how to create a safe space for the conversation. Think about whether the conversation is best had in the moment, possibly in front of other people, or one-on-one. In some situations, an in-the-moment approach might be sufficient. For example, if someone accidentally misgender a colleague in a meeting, a leader could say, let's make sure we're using everyone's correct pronouns and keep the meeting going. But no one likes to be put on the spot, right? And conversations are much more likely to turn tense if your colleagues feel like they're being called out. So if you need to confront someone, try to call them in by creating a safe environment where you can engage the person, in honest, authentic dialogue. So there's a huge conversation about, whether you should address something right at the moment when it happens or wait a later time to do it. And some persons will say, waiting at a later time, timing, as I said earlier, is everything, because you're now providing a space for conversation, and maybe a longer conversation that will somehow or hopefully result in some implementation or some training. But if you address it right away, you kind of, handle it in the moment, but what happens after? Because sometimes when we bring someone's attention to something, they don't always get the reasoning behind it, right? So you can say, make sure you're using the correct pronouns. Okay, but why are you really telling me to be using the correct pronouns? What's the purpose? But if you have a one-on-one, you're now giving the person the opportunity to have a discussion where you can further explain to them the importance and maybe help them to understand why they're being called into this conversation. So what's your relationship to the person who made the comment? Do you have a personal relationship with the person who committed the microaggression? If so, you might be able to simply say, hey, you made a comment earlier that did not sit well with me. Sometimes having a relationship with the person too makes it very hard for you to say to them, you should not be saying that. Again, play it by timing. Some persons can be very comfortable. For example, if Sarah were to say to me, Sonia, I didn't like the tone of your voice when you were, sharing something with me earlier. Based on the relationship that I have with Sarah, I will not take it personal, because I know had she not feel a certain type of way, she wouldn't have said that. But it could also be a different scenario where I feel as though, because Sarah and I are so close, she shouldn't have a problem with the way that I spoke with her, right? Or she spoke with me. Now, in closing, you may also need to bring other colleagues in who are closer, only because this might allow for the person who is being called out to be a lot more comfortable with having this conversation, knowing that it's coming from a place of training, it's coming from a place of educating, as opposed to them being signaled as somebody who is creating uncomfortable space within the workplace. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sonia. So to close, everything off, cultural sensitivity is knowing that differences exist between cultures, but not assigning values to the difference, better or worse, right or wrong. The second key takeaway is being mindful involves the readiness to shift one's frame of reference, the motivation to use new categories and understand differences, and the preparedness to experiment with creative decision-making and problem solving. And, For inclusive leaders, always watch for signs of underlying culture shock, moodiness, aggression, fatigue, self-isolation, and help that person find supports in the community, as well as from ACCESS Employment. There's a lot of different, community agencies like ACCESS that can help you with this and can help your staff with this. So just some key takeaways, some quotes for you to, leave the presentation from. And I just want to give a special shout out to TSLIP, to Tim Beat for bringing us together again. And if you don't know, TSLIP is a strategic community initiative focused on promoting welcoming communities and improving the social and economic outcomes of newcomers through enhanced service delivery, collaboration, and the development of partnerships. So thank you again for bringing us together. I hope everyone enjoyed the training today and learned something new. And we hope to see you at our third training.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you, Sarah and Sonia, for an amazing session, our second one. And thank you for everybody that joined us today. The conversation was super engaging, which is lovely. Even though it was a bit of a smaller group, it's great to see how much EDI related work that Sephora is doing. And it sounds like a good portion of you were from Sephora today. So that's lovely to hear. And we hope to see you at our last one on October 18th, where we'll be closing off this series with ACCESS Employment. So thank you again, everyone. And I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.